Welcome to the Voices of the World with your host, Anel. In these podcasts, we uncover the extraordinary lessons hidden within the lives of ordinary people. Each episode is a journey into the heart of life's teachings, shared through the stories of those who have lived them. Join me as we celebrate the wisdom and resilience found in every corner of the world. Here, every voice matters, and every story is a lesson in the art of living. Let's discover the world together, one life lesson at a time. Hello everyone! So another session of Voices of the World, and today I have a big surprise. It's a very unusual setup for myself because this podcast is being recorded remotely with a guest from Great Britain. I would like to introduce you Jonny Thomson, whom I actually found in the world of social media. And I was just surprised and astonished by the quality of the content that this gentleman brings to society. If you check Mini Philosophy, social media account on Instagram, you'll find so much interesting philosophical concept that is accessible to broad audience. He makes very deep and meaningful content and themes in such a easy and understandable way that captivates and makes you addicted to watch more and more. And when I even shared just one of your Instagram video reels on my story, amount of response I've got, it was amazing. It's like, wow, this is such an amazing, how did you find? So I'm actually feeling super lucky and honored to have you as a guest today, Jonny. Thank you so much for coming.
Oh, thank you for having me, and thank you for such nice words, and thank you for supporting me by reposting my stuff. You're making it easier and better for me. So, thank you very much. It's an honor, honestly.
100%. Jonny, I don't think everyone will know you from my listeners, so what I would like to do is to give you a stage, and I want you to brag about yourself. I want you to just introduce who you are, where you're from, and a little bit about yourself. You are actually one of the great things is that you're a best-selling author, so please tell me.
Thanks. Yeah. So, originally, I'm from Britain, as you said, and I was born over here and went to school over here, and then we did what's called A levels, which is what you do when you're 16 to 18 years old over here. And I had a really inspirational what's called RS teacher, religious studies teacher, a guy called Reverend Pete, and he was just amazing that he introduced philosophy to me, and he made it accessible and practical, and he understood me as a student. And so I do firmly believe that when people go to university to study things, I think most people do so because they've had some kind of role model, a teacher probably, who kind of put them there. And Rev Pete was it for me. So then I went to university in the north of the country, a place called Durham University, to study philosophy, and loved it. 3 years of doing single honours philosophy, and I specialise in Wittgenstein, which is the philosophy of language, which is really good, and I haven't done enough material on it lately, but I should do some more Wittgenstein. He's quite niche, and I think some people don't necessarily like the philosophy of language as much as the more kind of human and kind of relatable stuff. And then I ended up teaching. I ended up teaching philosophy, and I did so for 11 years in a school in Oxford. And I really enjoyed that experience. You get to speak to 16 and 18-year-olds about philosophy. And as I was doing that, I was lucky enough that I collected some good resources and good kind of materials. And then one day I just thought, right, what would happen if I put this on the internet? What would happen if I did this on social media, and how would that go down? And it went down well. Yeah, I set up Tumblr first, and that did quite well. And then I moved across to Instagram, and then that did quite well. And then after about 4 or 5 years of just writing, static posts, having an image and then text explaining these posts, it was only written content. I was anonymous at this point. I was behind a blank avatar, like a little kind of like icon, so you couldn't see my face, because all teachers are a little bit paranoid about putting their face out there, because you don't want kids to find you or follow you and stuff. And then so I collected about 10 of my best ones, and I sent them to my now book agent. And I said, I think this would be a really good idea for a book, explaining philosophy in these little bites, in the kind of like very accessible, kind of practical, but slightly jokey, wry, and slightly sarcastic way. And he said yes, and we then pitched the book to a few publishers, and lucky enough, quite a few liked them, and we ended up settling on my current publisher, which is Hachette. Wildfire, which is an imprint of Hachette. And that was mini philosophy, and that was in 2011, and it did really well. And I just can't imagine, I don't, to this day, I can't understand how it did so well. It's told, as I'm speaking now, it's been translated into 21 languages, and people all over the world are reading my words. And it was a bestseller in Poland, in South Korea, and in Germany. In some countries, it wasn't a bestseller. It barely sold in some countries, but we won't talk about those too much. And then that then led to 2 further books, which was Mini Big Ideas and Mini Psychology. Now, as I was doing the marketing, the promos for Mini Philosophy, my agent suggested to me that what I should do is approach lots of media outlets and say, look, hi, I've got this book, I've got this social media presence. Would you like me to write an article for you in return for you saying, buy my book. And one of those outlets, I just got on really, really well with them. I got on well with the editors and all of the writing team. They're called Big Think. And then I carried on writing for them actually after my book was out. And I wrote for them for 3 years. And then at some time in the end of last year, so this is 2022, they said, we want you to come full time. And I said, yes. And then I signed on full-time with them from 2023. So here I am now with my social media accounts. I've got Instagram, I've got TikTok, and I've got Facebook, and we're approaching 500,000 across all the platforms, which is incredible. I just can't believe I'm even saying that. I've got
this is massive.
People.
This is massive.
Yeah,
these days, actually, number of followers and subscribers matters a lot, and it tells a lot about what kind of content you create. And I'm actually super happy that content like yours, where you definitely you share true meaning and in true wisdom with people who are actually just want to maybe scroll and like waste their time. And but you do it that way so that every second is super deep.
Thank you.
I want to ask you, Jonny, so some people, when they go to university, right, they choose one path and then they realize that maybe that's not the right major, or they were not, this is not something they were searching for because they were like young, they thought that they like it, then they changed their career. I think I'm just describing my story of my life. So for people like me, your path is super inspiring. Inspiring because you stay true to yourself, to your wish, to your will. You listen to your heart back when you're 14 or 16 when you met your teacher, and right now you witnessing that fruits of those seeds that you actually planted many years ago. Can you please tell me how, for people like myself who for example have been changing majors, fields of their work, or young adults who are right now at the bridge of choosing their pathway, choosing either which major to study or which career to take, how they can be sure that this is the right path, how you were sure that this is the right path for you?
It's a good question, and I'm worried that I'm not going to come across as a traditional life coach, because I start with the basic point that most people everywhere, unless they're very lucky, have to get a job to pay the bills. You have to get a job first and foremost, and you need someone to, the way to pay the rent, you need to buy food and stuff. So I think, so in my own story, at the end of my doing my philosophy degree, essentially, if you want to carry on using philosophy as philosophy, essentially you have 3 options, and this is what most of my graduating class did. You essentially either you turn to law, you transfer it into a law degree, or you become a teacher, or you become an academic. And I didn't really want to do law, and I didn't really become an academia, so I ended up being into teaching. So I would have to say the first thing is to make sure you can live. You need some kind of salary. But then what I would argue is that it's really important to have a job which still fuels your passion, and at some point you are, well, 2 things really. One is that you have the space to use your intelligence, use your ability, use your passion. And the second thing is find a job if you can, because not everyone can find this job. I was very lucky to find this in teaching, where you also have time for side hustles. And that's where I ended up in writing, because a lot of people can go into writing straight away, and they're very lucky and they're very good at that, and that's great for them. But for me, I was teaching for a long time, And that gave me the time and the space to do my side hustles. So by side hustle, I mean like a side project, like a side passion thing. So, I mean, my first piece of advice is, to try to find a job which allows you to use your passions, but also find the job which gives you the space to explore those as well. And teaching for me is great because you get these big holidays when you're a teacher, where you can kind of explore your passion. But also there are jobs possibly which are either part-time or flexi-time, or which are work from home, which allow you more time in the evenings or the mornings and stuff to do your own things. And then the idea, of course, is the dream that those side hustles, those side projects ended up becoming a full job, which is where I am at now. And that took me 10 years. That took me 10 years to go from teaching to being a writer. And it was only actually after about year 6 or 7 I decided I wanted to be a writer anyway. So that's the first thing I'll suggest is that find time to have the space to experiment, really. And the second thing is to have a good network. I think. I mean, I'm very lucky that I've always had a friend network and a family who have always been there to support me. And Epicurus talks about this, the Greek philosopher. He talks about one of the highest pleasures in life is not necessarily having food, for example, or kind of being warm. It's the knowledge that you will be warm and you will have food in the future. And for me, at least, having a network of people who you know will always be there as a support is really useful and really helpful. And I think most people who I think are successful in life either have that all the time, or they know that they will have that all the time. Whether it's the nature of being a philosopher, or whether it's the nature of being a Thomson, my family, genetic, I catastrophize quite often. I imagine, what's the worst case scenario? If I was fired tomorrow and the house burned down and I hadn't got insurance or whatever, and I had a massive car crash or whatever, where would I end up? And in all of those scenarios, the worst case scenario, I can always picture 5 or 6 people at least who would always be there to pick me up, to be there to help. I would just sleep on my friend's sofa for 4 months. I'd like to go to my brother's house for a year and a half. And in that catastrophized world, things aren't that bad. So I kind of imagine so have a network and rely on a network and appreciate that network. And I think that enables you to be a bit more risky. I think that if all goes badly, then you'll always have that network there. I'm not sure I answered your question.
You did. You actually did.
I rambled a bit. Great.
And I had another question that I would like to ask. Road can be bumpy, and I'm sure your road was not easy as well. It's, of course, finding an agent to publish a book, or to publish a book, to write a book, it's not easy. To find a work as a teacher, it's not easy. To stay in the same university and teaching for young adults, philosophy concept, I'm sure it wasn't easy. How do you think philosophy, or speaking in your mind to those philosophers that you love, helped you to overcome those fears, obstacles, difficulties?
That's a good question. And holding kind of a philosophy closely to you is really important, I think. And in fact, I've noticed that one of the good things about doing my Instagram and my Reels is that there are certain things which do very much resonate with people. One I did recently was Viktor Frankl, who survived Auschwitz, and he did one about the meaning of suffering. And he had this therapy called logotherapy, which is the idea that if you find a meaning in your hardship, or you find a meaning in the misery that you might be going through at the moment, it puts a new spin on it. It turns it into a positive thing. It's turns it into a learning experience, which they talk about nowadays. But 2 things really. One is I think people can get carried away with that idea, the reframing negativity as being positive. I think that doesn't necessarily work all the time. And I think most people, most of the time, also want to avoid misery. We shouldn't seek it out. That's a kind of masochists wanting to hurt themselves. But the second thing is, I would say that for me never really resonated as a philosophy. I never really carried that closely. For me, what always worked better was Aristotle. And I think, I sometimes say to people, it's a bit grandiose, but I do sometimes believe that Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics possibly saved my life at some point. It was amazing. The depth I found in there of what is to be a human. And he talks about, to be human is to essentially be rational, but also to be sociable, and to be a political animal, he calls it, but it's also to live in groups. And I think that really shifted my outlook on life, that viewing that community, friends and family. I've talked about it before already in this podcast, but that is essential to being human. And I think if you ever find yourself going through hard moments, whether it's just stress or whether it's anxiety or whether it's something deeper, darker, depression, grief, whatever, I think remembering that there is a way humans are best suited at, and I think, and for me, and what Aristotle argues is community is really important.
But what Aristotle saved you from? Exactly. You were introvert, you were lonely. What exactly he saved you from?
Yeah, I mean, so I was going through a period of isolation that I think schools are funny old places that in the way that in term time, it's such a kind of like febrile, busy period of excitement that you're around students all the time, you're around other teachers all the time, and you're around kind of, parents, you're talking to them all the time, and it's great and it's really exciting. And then suddenly, when term ends, it becomes very, very quiet. Literally, at my school at least, it was within, an afternoon, the school would completely clear out. And it was like, have you seen that film 28 Days Later, when there's a man walking through the dead streets of London? No, I mean, it's essentially like that, and you've gone, and it's essentially you've gone from like sprinting on a treadmill to suddenly having to just like sit down, and it's hard work. So I think like replacing that kind of like finding a sense of community outside of the school, and I think schools are quite uniquely hard for this in the sense that they are so kind of what's the word I want? Niche, kind of parochial, they're kind of isolated, that you form such a community and network with your group of people that when that school kind of breaks up, what are you left with? And for me, that was the problem, that I had come from. Well, I was born in southeast Kent, which is in the southeast of the country. I went to university in Durham, and then I got this job in Oxford, and I had before that I had no roots in Oxford. And then when I first joined the school, I was like, great, I've got all of these friends now, I've got all these teachers and stuff. And then suddenly in holiday time, where's everyone going? And it was lonely, I think. Yeah, that's a good word for it. You said lonely, that everyone goes away. And so there was a conscious moment at the end of one of my holidays where I said, right, this is ridiculous. I need to make a life in Oxford. And then, of course, you find a separate problem, which I'm sure a lot of people listen to this will understand as well, is that as an adult, it's very difficult to form relationships on the same depth and with the same ease that you do at university or at school. For two reasons, really. One is that there's no outlet to do it. There's no kind of like easy third space by which you can meet friends. I mean, you've got sports fields, possibly, and you've got churches. I'm not particularly religious, but some people find religion is a good way to doing that. But you can't go up to a stranger in a pub and say, do you want to be my friend? And there's no, there aren't really dating apps for friends. So to find friends is difficult if you're an adult and trying to find them. And the second problem is you don't have the time that you used to at university and school to invest in those friendships. So the best friends I do have still to this day are probably my school and my university friends, because you spend such an intense period of time with them that you form long-lasting kind of connections, like properly, you weave your lives into them. Like I would argue that almost, the more meaningful moments in my life have not come from going out drinking with friends, or not at Christmas times, or not going on holiday to exotic countries. They've come just lying on the sofa watching a trashy soap opera. Or I remember my friends and I, we used to play Mario Kart. The game Mario Kart? We used to play it just like for hours on end. We're not doing any studying at university. And you kind of think, at one part, you kind of think, is that wasting my days? But then I look back at that time and I just think, well, actually, no. You were forming very deep relationships with people on the basis that you're just mutually just kicking back. And you don't do that as an adult. You don't spend time just doing nothing and just being in the room with somebody. But in fact, what happens today as an adult is when you do meet somebody, there's this pressure and there's this onus on constantly speaking. Like, let's say, let's meet up for coffee. Let's say you and I are going to go out for coffee in a coffee shop. We would spend, let's say, 2 hours, 3 hours constantly chatting. And it might be fun, it might be very exciting, and it's a good way of kind of catching up and bonding, but it's also quite draining. It's quite exhausting to constantly do that. But what friendships are like when you're in your university and at school, and also what they were like actually before modernity, before probably the social media age, is you would just be with someone without doing anything. You'd be sitting on the bench with them watching the world, or back in the day people would go on long boat voyages, for example, or if you're in the army or the navy or whatever, you'd spend lots of time around people just doing nothing. And in fact, there's this great play I love by Samuel Beckett called Waiting for Godot, And this is these two characters who are waiting for this Godot character who never appears. This Godot, and they're just on stage and they're prattling around, they're talking, they're moaning about life, and while they do have like sharp moments of bickering, when you're watching the play, you kind of think you guys are very close, and you would desperately miss each other if you weren't around. You're very close, and I think as you get to adulthood, it's hard to find that time to just sit around in doing nothing. And I think the only time we do it nowadays is like waiting for an aeroplane, possibly, that kind of aeroplane lounge place where you're just sitting on a bench doing nothing. I don't know if you found the same thing as an adult.
It's interesting that you're saying this, Jonny, because I actually heard probably from majority of people that it's exactly like as you're describing, that it's much harder to make friends when you're an adult, and those friends that you actually, especially university or childhood, high school, those are true friends because they remember you without your masks, right? I had different story. I have 0 friends from my high school. Maybe because I was bullied, or I don't know, it could be one of the reasons, but I was bullied in my primary school. But in my adult life, of course, there's only few friends that I can count on my hand that I can say that, as you say, right, that they will be there for me if I need. But I feel that when you're an adult, if you went to therapy and you actually know your true self, you know what you want from other people, and you start to also search for people who will reflect what you have in your soul, because you already know for sure what you need in life. Because when you're young, you don't express your fears. You have a lot of doubts. You may not be as open and emotionally intelligent to approach people as well, or to keep certain friendships. So, considering my story, don't you think it's also contradictory that at the same time, while people have a lot of masks when they're already at mature age, they are at the same time more pure or more clean on what they want from life?
No, I think that is interesting. I think it's interesting also because, your case is also very, very common, because I think people change, don't they? I think across a lifetime, people change, and also they grow, and they self-construct. As we get older, we kind of realize more, as you said, more introspection, maybe through therapy or maybe just through reading or meditation, whatever. And they discover that they want to be a certain type of person, and so they go through a conscious stage of reconstructing their self. And you say, right, I want to be this kind of person now. Now, the problem with that is that if you do have friends from your childhood or from university, those people are necessarily born of a certain person you once were. And this is why a lot of people find family reunions very difficult, because if you go back at Christmas or you go back to a birthday family time, whatever, you fall back into the old roles, don't you? Siblings start bickering like kids again. You start resenting your parents for being kind of like stifling and too kind of like naggy, because you revert back to these roles when you have yourself grown and changed. And so that's why it can be very difficult, I think, some people to go back to those kind of friendships. And I think what you've done, you've obviously, well, it sounds like you have, I should say, made yourself of something, or you've discovered something to yourself which is maybe more authentic, or it might be a different mask. We don't know yet really until probably the end of our days. And then you've built a friendship around that, and that sounds like it's working for you, because you've constructed yourself at the moment, and I think that's great. And I likewise have that situation right now. I mean, parenting is a great example of that. Is that before you have kids, you're an independent kind of like fairly mobile person, and then when you have children, you are very much kind of like the opposite of that. You're tied down to one person, to kids, and then you form a whole network around your kids. You meet new parent friends, and you have parent friends which are different again to school friends, different to university friends, different to work friends. Parent friends are a very unique breed of people who are often messaging at 3 a.m. in the morning saying, "Why won't my kids sleep?" Or, "Oh God, little Tony's got, I don't know, a vomiting bug," and everyone's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And you need that. And the support network around parenting is very different to all other friendships. So, yeah, I think you're right. I can't remember what we were talking about that.
We're talking about the fact that people have different formulas, right? One formula is maybe good for you, another formula good for me. And what I'm seeing in terms of when I go to your Instagram page, when I see your daily reels, I find it interesting that you have an amazing formula for your day-to-day appearance on Instagram, because you talk about such a common topics of life. You talk about self-doubt, you talk about fears, you talk about narcissism, you talk about how to make a choice, you talk about by the way, the Viktor Frankl's book Man's Search for Meaning is one of my favorite books. So You talk about things that we every day we see, we witness, but in such a beautiful way, connecting it to wisdom of centuries. My question to you, where and how you come up with these topics? How do you do you really for example, I'm drinking water, do you look at that water and then you think, oh, the philosopher back then, how do you find those ideas? How do you connect them? Where do you get the inspiration from?
I mean, sometimes it is that. Sometimes I will have just an idea. I'll be looking at something and think, oh yeah, I need to post about that. And sometimes it'll be through a discussion with friends. We'll be maybe having a dinner party or having a beer, and I'll be we're talking something and it'll come up. Sometimes I'll be reading something and it'll come up in a book, or I might be researching something. But nowadays I'm quite lucky that a lot of people just give me ideas. A lot of people message me, they say, have you thought about doing this philosophy or that philosophy? But it's very nice of you to say that they are universal and relatable. And I do try to do that. And I'm in an awkward place now. It's not really that awkward. I'm very blessed to being where I am. That I have there's two different kinds of followers at the moment in my account. I think the majority of my followers, if I'm honest, and if they're honest, are people who don't particularly know that much about philosophy, but they want the practical tips, they want the takeaways, they want almost that kind of self-helpy psychology, philosophy border. Fine. And then there's another group, which is probably the minority, let's say 15% of people who are die-hard philosophers who really want the philosophy stuff. Now, it's interesting that if you look on social media, mostly, particularly on Instagram, there are certain philosophers who just do really well, and that's people like Nietzsche, Camus does really well, and Rumi does really well. Stoicism does, these things, and that's always philosophy. If you search the hashtag philosophy on Insta, TikTok, Facebook, whatever, I guarantee Stoicism, Nietzsche will be up the top of there, and they'll go for the same thing, and that's fine, and that's very popular philosophy. But I feel like I have to try to oscillate between the popular self-helpy psychology philosophy, which is great. I do like exploring that as well. You talked about, regrets, hard decisions, heartbreak. It's really interesting. But also, then I also go back to the stuff which is slightly more kind of academic philosophy, I guess. So I have to do Bertrand Russell, for example, and logic, and I have to do Frege logic, and I have to do Descartes' Cogito and stuff, which are things which are you'd study on the philosophy course, but you probably wouldn't see on a TED Talk, or you wouldn't see on popular philosophy. But I have to be careful, because obviously the popular stuff does really well, and it's really good for the algorithm. Every time I talk about the algorithm, I feel like I'm betraying some distant philosopher. I'm thinking if Descartes or Plato had listened to me talk about, feeding the algorithm, they'd be rolling their eyes and turning in their graves. But yeah, you have to feed the algorithm by someone that's doing something which is popular, and what things are going to be popular. Mostly, as I say, I know Stoicism is going to do well. I know Nietzsche's going to do well. I know that religion always does well, ethics does well. But then I also I don't want to become a page which just sells pop philosophy. I want to dig into some deeper stuff occasionally, and I think I do. I mean, I did a post yesterday on Derrida. It didn't go down. It hasn't gone down very well at all. It's probably got about a third of what I knew my likes normally, but I'm okay with that. I know that the people who are liking that and viewing that are the people who want that kind of philosophy, and you've got to appeal to that base as well. But I mean, ultimately, philosophy, I think, should help you in some way and should steer your life. In fact, William James talks about this. He talks about a belief which has no real life application. It's probably not even a belief, really. It's definitely not true. It has no kind of application. So for example, every few years, Pluto is either a planet or not a planet. Pluto, when I was growing up, was a planet. I think now it's not. I think it's now some kind of, I don't know what it's called now, but different. And that doesn't matter to me. I don't care whether Pluto is a planet or not. That's an irrelevant belief for me. But, things about how to live my life, how to be a good person, how to be happy, the meaning of God and religion, those things are important. They do matter to me. And that's why I think exploring those issues is really useful. Sorry, I've done my thing again. I've ranted and rambled.
No, I think it's interesting. And you actually caught me by the word algorithm.
Yeah.
I remember, Rumi, yes, it's very common. I'm coming from Central Asia, Kazakhstan. So the Sufism and Sufi philosophy is one of the things that it's very close to our heart and to our history. And I remember when I discovered Western philosophy or the philosophy world for me opened up when I read my first book. I don't know if you heard of Sophie's World. It was very nice introductory to philosophy, and that was for me captivating. I was mesmerized by the fact that, oh my God, there's so much wisdom out there that I wasn't aware of. It was back in my days. When I look at my 4-year-old son, I look at him and I think, I don't think he would ever touch the book of Sophie's World, ever in his life. And I get scared, because I know it's not only about him, it's also, for example, I have very close friends who told me, Anel, what you write in your Instagram is a bit too deep. People don't have time to read this all. It's a bit too much. Maybe you should just talk about how good you are at networking. How did you do this and that? And I was contemplating about it. I was thinking maybe I should do the content that people care for, but that's not me. I like meaningful things. I do things for my heart, for my soul. If I want money, I go to work. But when it comes to certain things that is close to my heart, I always think that it needs to be meaningful, at least for myself. So my question is to you, with all the changes we're experiencing, AI, gamification, noise of information, what do you believe will be the future? And how can we keep still the ancient, timeless wisdom close to people's heart?
It's a really good question, and it's a difficult one. And I agree with you to an extent. I agree that we're living in what's called sometimes a post-literate world, that people can read, but they don't read. People prefer looking at my reels rather than reading the actual content. There's a good meme by a account called Philosopher Games, which says, remember everybody, while it's funny to laugh at memes, you have to sometimes read the original philosophy to understand them and to get them. And I appreciate that as well. And I think reading it's a really important skill to have. I think the depth required, the time required to read a proper philosophical book allows you to unpack it and to reflect on it in a way that you definitely can't get through one of my reels. In fact, I'd always encourage people to go away and read behind all of my ideas. What do I think about the future? I think that's not going to go away anytime soon. I think reading and writing is probably on the way out, not least because micro learning videos are so prevalent, and YouTube, I think only last week came out saying it's eating into the market share of everything. So people going on YouTube to get all of their access to knowledge. And weirdly, I don't think it's almost a return in some way to what Plato actually wanted. But I think this is the future. This is what the hopeful future I have, is that Plato a long time ago hated books. He hated them. He thought they were really rubbish because what happens with a book is that it's a monologue, it's a lecture. You're listening to someone talk, and that's not good for philosophy. It's not good to kind of to test you and stretch you, and it's not even that fun, really, he felt. things. What you need is a dialectic, a conversation, a kind of communication between two people. And I think that is where learning is going to happen. And that's where I think the future of kind of like of engagement and connection is going to be as well. It's not necessarily books, it's talking to other people. And I don't think that's going to go away. And my hope is that's actually going to be increased with VR, virtual worlds and kind of augmented realities and metaverses. I think we're going to have a lot more kind of interaction with people, like you and I, for example. We're talking, across hundreds of miles in different time zones, and I reckon only in 10 years' time, even I think you and I might be able to do this in a sim-based computer game. We could talk and stand up and gesticulate and kind of go for a drink, and I think that's exciting, and I think that kind of like communication is good and it's hopeful. And I think technology, I think almost 9.9% of the time has made humanity better off. And I think AI and where we are at the moment will also make us better off, and we'll adapt. Does that answer your question?
Nice. So you think it's not harming. So it's going to be out there just in different form. Is that correct?
It's harming the way of life at the moment. It's harming the way we do things now. But so did the printing press. The printing press harmed the way of monks who were transcribing books for millennia and stuff. And we don't now think the printing press was bad for humanity. And I'm sure antibiotics was harmful for the funeral industry because it saved lives. And there's always the way of doing things is always going to be disrupted by technology. And people are naturally, it's a natural human condition to like what you have already. It's kind of like bias towards what exists, and I think people aren't going to like the shake-up that AI and technology is going to bring to society. But I think society's always grown and better off in the long run. If people like to focus on AI as being a negative thing, I'm a writer. I should be one of the people who's worried about AI because it's going to take our job. Maybe it will, but also I think humanity will evolve and the society will change. And I don't think, as I said earlier, I don't think I'm going to die or be completely destitute as a result of this. I think humanity is going to get better. Society will improve with AI. I'm a techno-optimist, I think, rather than techno-pessimist. What about you? What do you think? What's your views?
I'm skeptical about many things, and however, I believe that there will be a balance. Certain jobs definitely will be gone. However, I'm optimist as well. I want to believe that as long as it will be very selfish or humble to say that as long as people like me and you are still alive and still being born, the love towards reading and writing will be alive, no matter how good ChatGPT will be writing your poems. Sometimes you feel, it's not the heart speaking there. So I truly hope, I just have hope. I'm not sure what it will be. But what I've been witnessing, maybe I'm just unlucky that majority of people take philosophy for granted. They think it's boring stuff. Let's be honest. If you were showing off Bugatti on your Instagram and always going to fancy places, you might have had not 500,000 followers, you will have had 1 million followers by now. So my question to you right now, Jonny, how do you think what would you tell to people who thinks philosophy is boring and useless?
Well, the first thing I'll say, again, when we pop among some philosophers, is that some philosophy is very boring. It is really hard to read. So I get this often actually when I used to teach philosophy, because I teach philosophy in the same way I do with my Instagram account. I make it quite accessible, engaging. I use everyday language, and I make jokes, and it's fun. So let's say I'm talking about Descartes' cogito, or even Nietzsche, actually. Let's say I'm explaining Nietzsche. I'm talking about his idea of eternal recurrence. A really interesting idea, really relatable. And then I say, right, guys, go away and read this book. They go away and read the book, and they come back to me next lesson, and they used to say, I couldn't make any sense of it. It was nonsense. It was really hard to understand, and it is. And some philosophy can be really boring. Like if you read like Leibniz, for example, or Hegel's notorious for this. Hegel apparently had like a one sentence which was a page and a half long. He rambles and he's ranty and he's hard to understand, and it is boring. But I would say that it's a bit like, actually, a lot of the best things in life is actually like running. I like running, for example. Running, if people ask me, why do you like running, Jonny? I can't explain to it really. I don't really like the pain. I don't really like the lungs being panting. I don't like sweating that much and stuff. But at the same time, I look back at it, I think that was a good experience. I'm better for the run. I feel happy. I feel fuller. And I think philosophy is a little bit like that. It can be hard. It can be grueling. It can be boring. And I think when you come out the other end of it, you kind of feel like you are fuller. And the process of reading and the process of slogging through some writing itself builds you and makes you better, wiser, more patient, and I think also more kind of verbal, more communicative. I think it helps in that respect. But the other thing I would say is that philosophy isn't always meant to be like talking about logic and abstract metaphysics. In fact, philosophy, when you look at the ancient Greeks, it was practical, and there's so much stuff out there. I mean, philosophy, like books, actually, you just got to find your philosopher, find your book. Because Hegel, people might not like Hegel, people might not like Leibniz, but they will like Aristotle, they will like Montaigne, they will like Nietzsche, or modern philosophers. Thomas Nagel, I think, is a really good writer, and he talks about like philosophy in a really accessible way. Simone de Beauvoir, these people who are really accessible, and Hannah Arendt. So what I'd say to people who are finding it hard or useless or boring is, you wouldn't say the same about a book. You wouldn't say that books are boring and useless, or like novels, I should say. They are. Some novels are boring. Some novels are useless or not worth the paper they're printed on. But at the same time, just go away and find the one that you like. Like, everyone's got their genre, everyone's got their favourite author, and same is true with philosophy. Find a philosophy which resonates and helps you. So that's two things I'll say. One is it can be boring, but two, it's not necessarily a bad thing. And three, if it's really boring, go find someone else. That's it.
What's your favorite book, Jonny?
It's a good question.
Just one book. Just one.
One book.
And why?
See, so I mean, Psychology and Ethics is probably one of my favourite philosophy books, and as I say earlier, it changed my life and it's going to transform my life. And probably most of my philosophy gravitates around that. It's at the centre of my world. But if I'm honest, there's only one book I've ever read more than 3 times. That's a book called The Princess Bride by William Golding. It's not philosophy at all. It's a slightly jokey, essentially it's a comfort read. It's the kind of book that I turn to when life is feeling stressed and overwhelming. And it's essentially like an adventure story, but it's done in a slightly tongue-in-cheek, mocking way. It's very readable and it's very funny, and it's very it's escapism, and it makes me feel better. It's one of the few books I read, and like afterwards, life seems easier, better, and more bearable. And that's why I turn to it quite a lot. So I always say, The Princess Bride by William Golding, which people wouldn't say from a philosopher. But talking about philosophy in Psychology and Ethics. How about yours? What's your favourite book? Have you got one?
There's one book that I can read probably again and again. It's The Prophet by Khalil Gibran. I think it's for me it's a Bible.
It's good. Yeah. I haven't read that long time. It's quite a small book, isn't it? So
it is very small.
But it's good for it.
Yeah, very good. By the way, whoever listening to me out there, highly recommend reading it. It's very philosophical, has lots of meaning. Jonny, if so we're approaching the end of our podcast, but I want you to think of an advice for future you in 20 years time, quoting either the words of the author you like or your favorite philosopher, what it will be?
Oh, that's a difficult question. 20 years time, what do I I'm hoping
quoting philosopher.
Quoting a philosopher. Okay.
What you will tell to your future self.
Okay. As in quoting myself as a philosopher, or I'm quoting an existing philosopher?
I want to challenge you. Give me a quote that you will tell the future you.
As in from me? from me?
Ideally, it should be someone
Okay.
that you felt always inspired by.
Okay. Well, it would be Aristotle again. Yeah. So remember the political animal. Man is a political animal, or is a social animal, and I am hoping that will be true in 20 years' time. That I will be surrounded by people who I love dearly and who love me dearly. That I think there's a period I'm going through now, and I hope I'm going to carry it on as I get older. Is that I'm going through a consolidation period. That I've collected a lot of contacts along the way, and I'm going through a period now where I'm saying, like, right, which of these contacts are actually meaningful to me? And I'm hoping in 20 years' time I would have whittled down that contact list to a small band of elite crack team friends who I love dearly and love me. So remember that man is a social animal, and so that if ever life is feeling hard, I'll remember to go out there and see those people. Not really what you're after, was it?
It is exactly what I was after. We started with Aristotle and we're ending with him. Thank you so much,
Good.
Jonny.
Thank you.
It was super helpful, super deep, and most important, I hope that through this session, those who listen to us will open books, will start to follow you, will start to get close to very easy concepts, but very deep, wise, that could help them to overcome challenges of their life. And most important, as you quoted yourself, quoting your favorite philosopher Aristotle, don't forget that you're not alone. Or if you're alone, go out and get out of your comfort zone and meet your people. They are out there waiting for you. It's scientifically proven. We need society. We need network of people with whom we feel happy. And I wish you all the best. I hope your circle will only grow. I hope your followers and readers will feel the true precious gift that you bring to this world by sharing your ideas and sharing the wisdom in such a beautiful format. Jonny, thank you so much for your work, for your Instagram account, for all the social media accounts, for your books, because they truly bring meaning. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks.